Hello, and to March, episode 200 of the Mulligan Stew podcast. Yes, I have a cold. Sorry about that. It's a cold. I did the test. I'll do it again tonight. It's a cold. It's just a cold. It's one of those things. This is episode 200. We wanted to do something very special to celebrate that. And how special can you be than having Joni Mitchell as your guest? Not today's Joni Mitchell. This is a mid-'80s. Where one of you will go, oh, come on, wake up. This was 1982 or 83, 84. It was certainly in the mid-'80s. Joni was on a speaking tour. How about that? Look at her legacy. Incredible music. Blue, considered one of the finest albums ever released. Canadian and American. From Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, the Queen City of the Prairies. She has gone on to become a member of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, Songwriters Hall of Fame, the Juno Hall of Fame, the Kennedy Center Honors, and one of the most formidable singer-songwriters that humankind has ever produced. It's wonderful. And this is fantastic that we can do this and share this love with her. Joni, if you get a chance to hear this, I thank you for allowing me to ask all these questions. It's a long time gone, but I still love it. And it's nice to have you here. Before we get started, I just want to thank a couple of people. Elliot Garnier, who helped me get this podcast started, suggested ideas and direction, and encouraged me to do it. He said, "You're already doing it. Let's package it." And then when he got totally swept away by running CKUA along with the leadership team, the great and wonderful Corey Wood showed up. Had no broadcasting or podcasting experience whatsoever, but he knew how to reach out to people on the internet. And he taught me every day, to this day. With this interview, he's still teaching me how to get it right. So thank you, Corey. And Meg Mulligan, who puts up with me and helps me in so many ways. Anyway, episode 200 of Mulligan Stew Podcast. I first met Joni Mitchell in a band house in Regina. I was a young radio announcer, ex-Mountie, and I was in one half of a duplex. The other half was whoever was playing the Fourth Dimension Coffee House, and we shared kitchens. Joni and Chuck Mitchell were playing 2 weekends and staying the week in Regina. I never saw Chuck anywhere, but Joni was always there every day, and so was I, and we got to know each other. She's the one that turned me on to English writer Josephine Tay. That's what she was reading at the time. And so I didn't see her till much later when I hosted the concert that raised the first money for Greenpeace. And the first concert where the words Greenpeace were ever used, Joni Mitchell was a headliner. She, at the time, was dating James Taylor. James Taylor was there that night helping raise funds. He had just released his first solo album. And Chilliwack was on that. Phil Oakes was on that same bill. And we raised, I think, $35,000 to $40,000 to take an old fishing trawler into the Amchitka waters and to stop nuclear testing off of Alaska. And Greenpeace went on to become what it is today. I saw her, of course, at the Last Waltz in San Francisco with her friends from Canada. It was wonderful. Now, this interview, because we don't talk about an album, we don't talk about a song, I'm thinking it's somewhere between 1982 and 1986, the mid-'80s. If some of you can actually tell me when this was, please write me, tmulligan@ckua.com. Thank you. Anyway, this conversation took place with the luxury of time, except for the moment, I don't know if I cut it out, where somebody knocks on the door and I think they want her to go somewhere. We just keep talking. And because it's an edited clips from a Much Music interview that I did, she jumps from subject to subject, but I think you get the sense of what she's trying to talk about. Joni Mitchell is going to talk about her memories and remembrances, and the video can be found on our YouTube channel. Here we go. Let's time travel with Joni Mitchell.
West, the nation's music station, Much Music. We are in the Dwight Yoakam Memorial Suite, this is where we interviewed Dwight Yoakam, but this time we have Joni Mitchell in tow. I was in San Francisco a couple of weeks back and stood opposite Winterland and remembered the Last Waltz and your part in the Last Waltz. What can you remember about that magic Thanksgiving night so many years ago with Robbie Robertson and all of those people?
I felt pleased and I felt kind of lonely. You know, there were no other women at the event. There were women added to the film afterwards because I think they realized after the fact that it was a little spotty in that department, you know. And while that was an honored position, you know, I would have liked some feminine camaraderie. Neil's a very good friend, and he and I had a trailer. And that's why I ended up singing a duet with him, you know, from the Wings. We came up with this idea, you know, for mutual support. It was amazing that the thing flew. There was very little planning, you know, like as far as the participants went. You know, you just kind of went on and did your thing. There were a lot of people backstage that weren't in the show. Freddie Neal, for instance. So it was a meeting of people from different parts of your life. I remember thinking at the time, in a way, while it was a beautiful thing, in a way it was a kind of a sad moment, almost as if it marked the turning point or the end of the old guard, you know. Like it was a wrapping up and a signing off. It definitely was for Robbie until recently, and I didn't feel ready to wrap and sign off, you know.
Could you have gone away? I mean, Robbie went away for 11 years, ostensibly. He wrote soundtracks and filmed them, but he didn't tour or anything. Could you have turned your back on music like that?
I've threatened to quit all the way along, and I have quit from time to time, but never for that length of time.
You've said you've quit, but in your heart of hearts?
Well, I've taken sabbaticals, but I can't stop writing. So, you know, even while I'm away, I end up with a collection of songs, and they go back in the studio, and then everything follows suit. Then you're back on the road again.
You have described your songs as your babies, so one would presume that would be from a seedling to the whole recording finish process.
Well, there's a nurturing. I have no children, so I guess my maternal instincts or the energy that would be put into mothering goes into the creation of music, and I see the song more as the different aspects of the personality of the child. It's more the album that is the child, and the child, you know, is nurtured, and you try to put the best of yourself into it, and the release of an album is almost like sending your kid into the first grade. You know, you hope all goes well. You know, sometimes it comes home crying with a bloody nose, you know, and you have to give it a pep talk and say, you know, don't worry, you know, you're going to grow up to be a nice kid, you know. 10 years down the line, they'll recognize that you're a nice kid, you know. You're a little hard to look at sometimes.
Bruce Springsteen, in his introduction to Bob Dylan entering the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, made the comment that people won't let Dylan forget about Like a Rolling Stone and those great songs, Highway 61 Revisited, and that they tend to ignore some of his recent work. If another younger artist had come along and written that work, that they would call him the new Bob Dylan.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and I see the same thing in some cases applying to you as well, that some of those people out there would not let you forget your Court and Spark period and let you get on with what you want to do now.
Or Steely Dan, you know.
Sure.
Like you take Asia and Gaucho. Asia was loved, Gaucho was a recipient to a lot of criticism. Had they been released in reverse order, I think the same rule would have applied. You know, I don't think it really had to do that much with the material. It has to do partially with the phenomenon of expectation. If a project is loved, for instance, this record has had wonderful press and a wonderful tailwind, you know, there is a high degree of possibility that no matter what I do on the next one, because of the expectations, it will not be as well received. You know, that seems to be the pattern.
You have said yourself that you try not to get your hopes up with all of these albums, 15 of them now, but there must have been something that stirred in you that told you that this album was particularly good.
No, oddly enough, with this one, we took our fair share of knocks prior to the release, because the pattern had already been set in certain communities, like of a closed-mindedness almost to anything that I might do. So people began to get the image of the music as difficult and hard to get into, and even prior to release there was this attitude that had to be broken down within certain members of the record company. It's a study in human nature, this job.
You were asked recently in a wonderful book, does your audience know you as well as we think we do? And you made the comment that you put out your songs, and if they spark off of those people the way they sparked off of you, then you have that in common, and yes, we do know you.
It's always my optimism, you know, that if there is a revelation in regard to my own nature that finds its way into the material, and perhaps it's too revealing in the context of the pop climate, for instance, a line like, I don't like to lie, but I sure can be phony when I get scared. You know, you think to yourself as you're writing this down, well, gee, God, you know, Joan, I mean, you know, do you really want to put a line like this out into the, you know, into the world? You want to be responsible for that kind of frankness. And actually the first live performance of that song was in San Francisco at Mimi Farina's festival, Bread and Roses.
Yes.
And after I sang it, there was a murmur that went out as that line struck the audience. Well, it was more than a murmur, it was like a gasp. It was like, oh! But there were hundreds of voices that went, oh! Like that. And it was kind of a treat because I said to myself, oh, good, you know, like, I mean, hopefully that's not that they're shocked at me, but that's the sound of kindred experience, you know, expressing itself.
Didn't you have the opposite reaction at Amnesty International when you were singing the song #1 and people were throwing things at you?
What happened? It was a New Jersey audience. New Jersey audiences get drunk as the day rolls on and like to throw things. And they'd been throwing things at Bryan Adams, who went on before me. This I realized after I reviewed the tape and looked at it, that this had been going on for some time, uncontested. I walked out, I put my glass of water down between the microphones, and one of these guys that were throwing things was a dead shot. And it hit the glass, and the water rooster-tailed up to eye level. You can see it on the film. There's this shiny stripe of material. Well, I thought it was breaking glass. So on national television, I went to the lip of the stage and told them off.
Yes.
For which I received Worst Performance of the Year in Rolling Stone magazine, my annual Worst Of award. And the next song, though, was this song #1. And I thought as I was singing the song, in the middle of it, it occurred to me that it was the perfect soliloquy for persecution, that they could throw all they wanted to, like it would just, it was like Shakespearean, you know. How do the words go? It goes, shall I shower you with flowers or shall I shun you when your race is done? You know, I thought, throw it now, throw it now.
Do you know that there are still people out there who believe that, in fact, that you fled to the United States of America and left Canada behind?
Oh, I didn't flee. No. See, that's something we should maybe clear up.
Good.
You know, I know it is perceived in some circles that I am an expatriate. You know, I said in one of the interviews, like, well, couldn't you perceive me as an ambassador? You know, why? I still have my passport. Why is it that I'm a traitor for having gone to the States when I could barely get any work up here? You know, it wasn't even for the sake of, it wasn't for conquering, it wasn't ambition that took me across the border. It was bread and butter, you know. I met a folk singer from Detroit, Chuck Mitchell, who I later married, actually. He drew me across the border on the pretenses that he could get me work in some small towns in the outlying Detroit area. And while down there, convinced me that I should marry him.
You must have got an example of what Canadians feel for you. For example, at Tears Are Not Enough. Here are artists who are singers and songwriters in their own right. They have their own audiences coming up to you and letting you know how important you are to them and what comfort it is to know that they have a leader in you.
Well, you never really know what you mean to other people, you know.
Until they tell you.
That helps, yeah. I guess if people tell you, then there's an attempt to clarify it. It's not even good to know. You know, I mean, it's better not to know, don't you think?
Don't you get people coming up to you saying, listening to such and such an album was an experience that changed my life?
Oh, yeah, but this is different, though. This is the connection that I enjoy. what I enjoy is when the song goes into a life. I'll give you an example. There was a dancer in New York City, black, gay, estranged from his father because of his lifestyle, and he did a ballet with all different kinds of dance expression. He did an evening of dance using my music and King Sunny Aday's music. And his father attended it. At the end of the performance, his father came up very excited, and he wanted to talk to him, especially about the song Ethiopia. So the dance and that song created a dialogue between a father and son who hadn't spoken for many years. 2 weeks later, the man died. So, not the dancer, but the father. Yes. So this song was catalyst to a dialogue, one of the last opportunities. These are the kind of things that I think are beautiful. That's the optimism that I have for my music, that it would enrich a life.
And they are Bryan Adams, Robbie Robertson, Bruce Cockburn, and yourself. All of you Canadian. You all know each other. And, of course, you and Bruce Cockburn go back so many years. Why is that you all struck on the same chord?
Well, I've always written about Indians in my music. They appear in my dreams from time to time. So, to me, the Indian problem is not an isolated problem over there. It's not like empathy for those poor people. We are all in this together. Yeah. You know, and that's the main thrust behind the writing of my song. I'm not really familiar with Robbie's or Bruce's. I don't know what points they're emphasizing, but
the points that you all make are that this earth is that we live here, and it is a combination of myth and spirituality, and even Midnight Oil in Australia are saying exactly the same thing that you all say, and that is respect the land rights of the North American Indian and the Aborigine and give them back the land that we stole from them.
Well, you know, I mean, I think that they may be the meek that shall inherit the earth, you know, although tribally many of them have lost their earth lore also with the reservation difficulties with that you know, the white man has imposed upon them, what with the robbing of their culture and the bringing of Christianity, which does not apply to their way of thinking, and the black coats and the booze, you know. Although on many reservations there is reform afoot and a rediscovering of old values, I'm very optimistic and frankly a little romantic, you know, about Indian and Inuit people, and I get an alien kind of vision from time to time where I think I see things like an old primitive, you know, and I look upon the Frankenstein of white progress as complete insanity.
I simply find it ironic that all 4 of you are Canadians. I really do. Have you been comfortable with the small legacy that you've left us behind in terms of videos? And will you be applying those same techniques to your new videos for the new album?
The only really finished-looking videos that I've done, I think, was the one that I did with Blashfield for Good Friends, You and Me, and the 2 little black and white Super 8s that I did, Shiny Toys. Those were just kind of a lark. We did 2 of them for $5 grand, and one of them has never been seen, the one on fiction. I think that's the stronger of the 2, but it's very dramatic. I've only done really 2 videos, and the rest of them have been kind of like homemade projects.
Okay. I suppose that this speaking tour that you're doing is our concert tour for the year, because if you wait for all of those artists, those musicians to free themselves up, we might not see you for another 3 years. They're very important people.
Well, Manu and my husband play really well together, and we've been in contact all this summer. There was some talk originally of me going out this summer, but to go from a talking tour to a playing tour is a lot of energy expended, you know. So now leaving a gap to kind of fuel up again, I haven't checked in to see who's going out when, because I know that there are 3 of us that want Manu, can't live without him. Hey Manu, we can't live without you.
You have made a comment to the effect that you didn't fit on the radio these past couple of years. Do you think this album will change all of that?
No, it wasn't. It wasn't a matter of feeling It was just that my music had gone in a direction. It developed in such a way that it didn't belong to any orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. You know how radio got so pigeonholed.
But you're not prepared to go to them. And all things will come full circle.
Well, with the success of Peter and Sting and Paul Simon's project, the airwaves then opened up.
Yeah.
You know, because we know how, I think the four of us have kind of a kindred direction. I mean, you can play those four artists interchangeably.
And it's not really rock and roll as we know it.
It's a more international kind of music.
What would Charles Mingus think of this album? Would he like it?
I don't know. You know, if he had lived this long, there's a possibility that he would have changed. At the time that I worked with him, he liked acoustic music. He didn't really like the way jazz was going. He didn't like much of the music that I adored, like Weather Report, who were the vanguard to me of progressive jazz. Yeah. Heading to that same cusp, you know, heading to the tightrope walk between rock and roll and heavy metal and pop and jazz, and maintaining virtuosity, experimenting with keyboards, looking for new sounds. I mean, they were one of the first punk groups as far as I'm concerned, you know, like, and he was not a fan of that direction. You have to, you know, you gotta ward off fogiedom. Miles will never be a fogey. Miles is like, he's a youth forever, you know.
The wonderful Joni Mitchell from the mid-'80s with myself. I can't remember where we did the interview or what the circumstances were. However, I do remember those days in Regina and being on stage at Greenpeace and Last Waltz. We would never forget that. Thank you, Joni Mitchell, for being you and for your music. Your music will stand the test of time. Thank you. And Canada is very proud of you. What I'd like to do is actually a new Joni Mitchell interview, but she's protecting her space right now, and rightly so, recovering. So that is episode 200. Next week on the Mulligan Stew podcast, it's Valerie June. Valerie June has started her Moon and Stars tour. The album is called The Moon and Stars Prescriptions for Dreamers, as a follow-up to the 2017 The Order of Time. And April the 1st, she was in Vancouver at the Commodore Ballroom, and she moves on. She ends up in Toronto about 2 weeks down the road. Valerie June, next week on the Mulligan Stew podcast. If you have any suggestions for guests, keep it reasonable. Some you're never going to get to. Just write me, tmulligan@ckua.com, and tell somebody. Subscribe. Thank you. Appreciate it. Take care. Anybody want a cold?